Hey guys, how's it going? In last week's livestream, we got a full rundown on each of the available Ascendancy classes coming to early access. And since then, we've also had a few leaks on additional nodes in those passive trees. Chapter markers below, separated by class for you to jump around. For those new to Path of Exile, or if you aren't up to date, here's some quick info. Only 6 classes will be available at the launch of early access a week from now. Each class will have 2 Ascendancies to start with, but will have 3 options come for release. We should also see the remaining 6 classes coming to early access over time. We've heard the Druid and Huntress should be coming, and I quote, relatively soon, and that's direct from the game director. And finally, if you're not familiar with what Ascension is in Path of Exile, Ascension can be thought of as one way to specialize your class. You should always take an Ascension when you get a chance, as they can lead to great increases in power. You can ascend 4 times, gaining 8 passive points in total to put into a smaller passive skill tree. These passive trees often have significant benefits to power, and can also give you brand new Ascendancy specific skills. To ascend in Path of Exile 2, you have to complete one of 2 trials on 4 different difficulty levels. You can do the same trial 4 times, or mix and match. On full release, we'll have 3 total trial options, with the final yet to be announced. You'll find your first trial in Act 2. I won't go over the trials here as this video is long enough, but the trials both revolve around surviving a number of rooms or enemies, and then a boss, with subsequent trials having more rooms and likely more bosses, and each having their own unique twists. Now with that out of the way, let's jump straight into it. The classes we're talking about today are the Sorceress, Warrior, Ranger, Witch, Monk, and Mercenary. Remember, your class determines which Ascension options you have. If you want a Sorceress Ascendancy, you must be the Sorceress. So let's start there. The Stormweaver. From what's been shown, it's heavily focused on lightning skills and buffs that improve your shock ailment. We saw Tempest Caller, which makes your critical hits create small storms, which will form on top of your targets. A great passive damage boost, and some decent AoE in small spaces. Next was Strike Twice, which allows you to stack 2 shocks instead of 1, but does reduce their duration by 50%. And finally, Shaper of Storms, which allows all damage from hits to contribute to shock chance. Notice from hits in there, meaning this won't work on things like a damage over time cloud, but it does mean you can use skills other than lightning-based abilities and still have this help you build up your shock value on enemies. It's also worth mentioning with this first Ascension that we are talking about 3 points on an Ascendancy tree that has 20 points on it. There is a lot of information for this and the other Ascendancies that we don't know in full, but this does give you a general idea of what direction the other nodes may go in. You can't take all 20 passive nodes either. Ascendancies can only have 8 passive points allocated in total. As you can see, you generally need to take a smaller node before the bigger, more impactful nodes, which are what we're seeing shown off. Looking at the art for this Ascendancy, it does look somewhat like ice floating around the character next to lightning. I wouldn't be surprised if we also see cold damage options in there on early access release. These Ascendancy nodes could be brought together into a very solid build. Shock in Path of Exile increases the damage taken by the target. Being able to sack this even with the shorter duration could allow you to throw 2 shocks on a target that increases your damage 2 times over. If you can time your combos during that window, it'd be a great chance for rotations of large damage spikes. For something more sustained and less bursty, going hard on critical hit chance and using large AoE spells should proc your elemental storms frequently, giving you lots of small storms all throwing out damage. The elemental storms look to be random. In the footage we see a fire, ice, and lightning storm form. This is where the Shaper of Storms node could come in, to ensure all those storms continue proccing your shock chance, but there are almost endless possibilities in Path of Exile 2. Experiment with your builds. The second Sorceress Ascension shown was the Chronomancer, and this one has a lot of utility that could really benefit hardcore players. Again, and I won't say this every time, but we have 3 points on what is a larger tree, and we'll be able to view them all in-game before picking your Ascendancy. The Chronomancer looks really interesting to me. We're seeing a lot of these Ascendancies actually give you skills, which wasn't common in Path of Exile 1. The ability shown off for the Chronomancer is the ability to freeze time. It kind of does what it says on the tin really, but it's important to note you can do damage to enemies who are frozen in time, as we see the Sorcerer here throw down an ice meteor. The 2 other abilities included Temporal Rift, which throws you back a certain amount of time, resetting your life and mana values to what they were a few moments ago. Great if you have very expensive combos and want the resources back, and also helpful if you're out of position, as this skill will also teleport you back to the same location you were standing in a few moments ago. A lot of great uses with this skill as a way to generate resources or an escape. And finally, we saw Time Snap, which resets your cooldowns. This is an Ascendancy that really has a great deal of utility, some great oh shit buttons in there to freeze enemies and heal yourself, or even reset valuable cooldowns. and they're equally useful as offensive and defensive options. This has a lot of potential to enable a lot of different builds, but we really need to see what the cooldown on these abilities are to give you a solid impression. Next up, we saw the Warrior. Starting with the Warbringer, this Ascendancy has a focus on totems and war cries. Totems being summons you can throw down for a variety of reasons, including buffs or direct damage, and war cries having similar mechanics but tied to your character. Our first point here is Answered Call, which adds an ancestral spirit to your totems, causing a spirit to appear each time a totem is summoned. In the short gameplay we've seen, we only saw one spirit, this large ape-like creature that charged at enemies and kind of just ran away. The game director has commented in interviews that this wasn't a great example, it was supposed to stand and fight. With Jade Heritage, we saw the character become encased in Jade, which blocked all incoming damage from a very meaty boss hit. And then we move on to the Warcry benefits. Warcaller's Bellow causes corpses to explode around you when you Warcry, dealing 25% of the dead monster's life as damage in an AoE. Corpses are left over when you kill enemies. They can be used for various summoning purposes and for skills like this. An active skill that explodes corpses is great in a few scenarios, whether you're clearing weak packs and can use corpses on the ground to finish off the stragglers, or maybe you're fighting a tough rare and can kite over a mass grave you left behind for a big hit. Less helpful in boss fights where there are fewer weak monsters, but this could be a great addition to the Warrior's repertoire, as a class that isn't normally all that focused on interacting with the corpse mechanic itself. And finally, Great Wolf's Howl, which ignores the Warcry's cooldown. This seems fairly nuts. Warcries can often provide quite powerful buffs to party members or debuffs to enemies, and being able to explode corpses too. This would be a great option for mapping if you've got some speed, and the damage off those corpses remains consistent, to help you add that little bit of extra damage. Moving on to the Warrior's second Ascendancy, the Titan. The Titan only showed off 3 of those passive nodes officially, but we have seen 4 other passive nodes leaked, and they sound pretty chunky. Starting with what was shown off on stream, Earthbreaker causes your slam skills to have a 20% chance to cause aftershocks, which are small AoEs that repeat themselves in the location of the slam. This looks to only be usable on slam skills itself, so keep that in mind. You can generally find labels like slam in the skills menu. So when we're finally playing early access, look out for those tags and how they interact. We then saw Crushing Impacts, which turns hits into crushing blows, which from Jonathan's brief description, sounds like it will increase the speed at which your slams put enemies and bosses in particular into a stun animation. And finally, Surprising Strength, which as you can see from the graphic, is the node that comes after Crushing Impacts, meaning you must take it before you can access Surprising Strength. Surprising Strength gives you a flat 40% more damage against heavily stunned enemies. This is going to be great against bosses if you can line up massive combos after stunning, like dropping a nuke, turning this class into an incredibly heavy hitting machine, which will do very well against single targets. Now to the leaks. Jonathan confirmed on Gazzy and DM's podcast that the Titan will have a node that allows you to increase your inventory amount. Path of Exile 1 players will remember the little bag from the Affliction League. The passive will give your Titan a little more inventory space. Sounds interesting, but I'd rather the raw power personally. The other leaks we saw are Ancestral Empowerment, which boosts every second slam, which until I get more details, sounds like more raw damage. Stone Skin, which doubles the armor on your equipped body armor, and Mysterious Lineage, which grants you an insane 20% more max life. That's a must take if you grab this Ascendancy, if you ask me. A Titan is likely to be a tanky boy already, and is going to have a great max life. Being able to boost that another 20% is just kind of nuts. Wrapping up the Warrior, it's worth mentioning as well, the game is early access. If one of these Ascendancies ends up overpowered, you can expect some tweaks to occur. They did this during Path of Exile 1's development, resetting passive skills for players when changes occur. This should be minimal, but something to keep in mind. And over to the Ranger. The Ranger's Deadeye Ascendancy offers us endless munitions. This is a simple and solid buff, adding an additional projectile to your skills fired. But keep in mind, an extra projectile also means an extra hit. If you're stacking ailments, having that additional hit is more than just damage. It's also additional debuffs you can be applying and stacking faster. The second point is Eagle Eyes, which removes accuracy penalties. Something to be mindful of in Path of Exile is your attacks can miss. This is often something you'll notice early on, but generally gets lost in the noise as your accuracy increases, and you're throwing out more attacks later on. Being able to remove missed shots is an all-round win, and can give you back some space on your gear in the passive tree for other options. And finally, for the Deadeye, we saw Gathering Winds, which gives your player a small amount of movement speed increase on skill use to keep you moving and swift on your feet. Legolas power fantasy, anyone? But you do lose this speed and any stacks of it should you take a hit, so be careful. Bit of a short one there because we didn't get much more information. The Ranger's second Ascendancy is the Pathfinder, which looks to be bringing back the concoctions from Path of Exile 1, but with a different flavour. This is one I'll need to play around with. From the description given by Jonathan, the Pathfinder can use their flask charges to throw various concoctions at enemies, resulting in ailment effects like bleed or shock, which cause damage over time or cause enemies to take more damage for a short period of time, respectively. I'm interested to see the value proposition for this in-game. I'm not sure losing a flask charge is worth throwing a bleed on an enemy. I feel like there may be better ways to build this into other skills with support gems, but I could imagine very specific builds preferring to go down the concoction route and have them quick and throwable, especially if bleed chance on a skill is replaced by certain bleeds from a concoction. It also looks like you may be limited to a single concoction with fulmination and bleeding located around a central node in the graphics shown. This Ascendancy also includes contagious contamination and overwhelming toxicity, which together allows you to more easily spread poisons when you kill enemies, making them spread to one another and allowing you to double the number of poisons you inflict for a small duration nerf. The final part of this Ascendancy shown off is Running Assault, which allows you to move a little faster when using skills while moving. Great for players that like to go fast. And a node discussed but not shown, Relentless Pursuit, makes you immune to slows, which with a more methodical combat and importance in dodging is quite valuable. Alright, onto what is most certainly my starting class now, the Witch, and their first Ascendancy, the Infernalist. The Infernalist has some really unique interactions that are sure to have a lot of currently unknown combinations with uniques and other systems. I'm going to start this one talking about Pyromantic Pact, which turns your mana resource into Infernal Flame. This, in essence, changes how your mana works. You're no longer limited by your mana amount. When you cast, you build up Infernal Flame instead. Cast too many times and build up too much flame, and you'll take a hit to your life and energy shield as fire damage. This then causes it to reset to 0. But if you haven't cast in 2 seconds, you'll begin losing Infernal Flame as well. Now, key to this is you take maximum life and energy shield as fire damage each time you cap your flame. Now, that is brutal if you have no defenses. If you have 100 HP and reach max flame, you're taking 100 damage, plain and simple. But if you have resistance to fire, let's say 50%, then you're only taking 50 damage. This Ascendancy node could synergize very well with fire resistance modifiers, but if you also happen to take the Bringer of Flame node that comes after the Pact, you want to keep your flame in the mid to high range, as this passive makes all damage from you and your minions contribute to ignite chance, and magnitude when you're over 30% Infernal Flame. Keep that flame in the sweet spot with an army of minions behind throwing ignite on enemies, and watch them all slowly burn to ash. The other 2 skills we saw from this Ascendancy are equally as cool. Loyal Hellhound lets you summon an Infernal Hound, which will soak up 20% of the hits you take before they come to you. Not sure if this will take 20% damage from the Pyromantic Pact as well. That would be interesting to see again, reducing that penalty from building up too much flame. And finally, something I'm most excited for, Demon Form. Being in this form will take an increasing amount of damage over time, but you also gain faster casting and increased damage. I'm really curious if this transformation gives you additional skills, or if you're casting the same skills faster and with more damage, with the downside that it burns you down. Until we see all the nodes, I'm not entirely sure how I want to build around the demon form, but a large health pool is going to be a plus for this form and the Witch's second Ascendancy. This second Ascendancy is the Blood Mage, which turns your health into more than just what keeps you alive. Your skills will cost life instead of mana after taking your first Ascendancy point in this one. But enemies will begin dropping life orbs on kill, which will heal you. And something recently mentioned on Gazzy and DM's podcast by Jonathan is that this node also gives the Blood Mage the ability to overheal with these orbs, essentially giving you an additional piece of temporary health. The Blood Mage seems like a very good option, assuming your skills can deal with the life cost. Crimson Power will give you Energy Shield as extra max life based on your equipped body armor. Vitality Siphon will let you leech life for 10% of your spell damage, which is not bad to be honest. I could see this spell damage making up for the spell's cost, assuming you're landing those hits. And Gore Spike is the final passive node we saw for the Blood Mage, which increases critical damage by 1% for every 20 life. That's big if you're looking to stack crit damage, as this Ascendancy is already hedging bets on a large life pool. The synergy there is quite strong. I'm quite interested to see what comes after Gore Spike on this passive tree. I feel that node will really bring this one together. Alright, our last 2 classes are the Monk and the Mercenary. The Monk's first Ascendancy is the Invoker. Leaning into the elemental effects, we start the Invoker with a look at and scatter them to the winds. With this node, any melee critical hit is followed up by a wave of elemental magic, similar to the Sorceress's Ascendancy Storms. Which element in particular seems to be random here again. The Invoker can then specialize into I am the Blizzard or I am the Thunder, both of which benefit cold and lightning damage respectively, adding 10% extra damage to each type based on your choice, while also giving you additional chance to create chilled or shocked ground. Picking either of these nodes then lead into And I Shall Rage, giving you the Unbound Avatar skill. We didn't get a really good look at this skill in the short gameplay clip shown. On landing elemental ailments, you'll gain stacks of Unbound Fury. Once at a high enough level of stacks, you can activate Unbound Avatar for increased damage and ailment chance. A good option for quick bursts of high damage, or for getting in those final ailments for a freeze or shock. And finally, Faith is a choice. Allows the monk to meditate briefly, doubling their overall energy shield for a short time. I'm curious about this skill. We learned that skills from Ascendancies can also be augmented by support gems. If you can augment the cast time to allow you to cast this quicker, we could have a very solid defensive option in fights. Doubling your energy shield, especially if you focus on stacking this resource, could really let you tank some big hits, but I question whether this is more for use just before entering a boss room as opposed to in combat. If you're feeling a little more of the dark side, the Acolyte of Cheula is the second monk ascendancy. This ascendancy is quite unique as it lets you swap out your spirit resource and replace it with darkness instead. Looking over the description for this, darkness appears to be reserved for 10 seconds for each life or energy shield lost. Now, with this, you gain 5 darkness per level, and through the campaign, you'll likely pick up more spirit from optional bosses, plus any you want to grab on the passive tree. Darkness is basically going to act as a secondary energy shield, giving you even more survivability, which for the monk is going to be needed as a squishier melee fighter. If you find yourself dying, this might be a good ascendancy to go for. Grasp of the Voice then gives you 1% more damage as extra chaos damage for every 20 unreserved darkness. So once again, if you're stacking spirit and have not taken damage recently, which reserves your darkness, you'll gain 5% more damage as chaos simply by taking this. As you stack more and more spirit, which is converted to darkness, you'll then do more and more chaos damage. But of course, this ascendancy offers more than just darkness. There is even more focus on chaos damage and resistance. Cheola's gift gives you plus 10% to your maximum chaos resistance and doubles what you have, meaning you'll gain twice the benefit from any chaos resistance modifiers you have in your passive skill tree or armor, and anything you have in your armor or passive skill tree will also be doubled. Consuming Questions will turn your mana leech into energy shield leech, meaning as you do damage, you'll regain energy shield. And Ravenous Doubts makes this instant, but taking Consuming Questions will remove any passive regeneration you have on the energy shield, so you do have to take the positive with the negative. Initially, this ascendancy wasn't a top priority for me, but I can absolutely see this being an incredible build for chaos dots if you can keep the darkness unreserved, which means keeping yourself relatively damage free. Now that might be quite a challenge in many areas of the endgame, but for bossing, if you've got the mechanics and dodging down, this could be a solid boss killer. And finally for this, we also saw Waking Dream, which allows you to see into the breach, which is a fun in-lore explanation for the fact that small embers will appear that restore life, mana, and can give you extra damage. We didn't get an idea of how much damage, so you'll need to explore that on release for sure. And lucky last, the Mercenary, one of the most unique classes in Path of Exile 2, and of course we are starting with the Witch Hunter. They had to give us some kind of Van Helsing fantasy, and this is it. First, what we were shown in the presentation and some further leaks. In the presentation, we saw Obsessive Rituals, which decreases your armor and evasion, but gives you Sorcery Ward, which will defend you against elemental hits. This will have a certain amount it can block. It isn't a full-blown immunity to elements, but it'll be a lifesaver. In Path of Exile, elemental damage is often what will take you down fastest, especially those pesky ground effects. The Witch Hunter also offers Zealous Inquisition, giving you a 10% chance to explode enemies on kill, dealing 100% of their max life around them as physical damage. And this chance is doubled for undead and demons. Loving this power fantasy already. Judge, Jury, and Executioner gives the Mercenary a chance on their first hit against an enemy to deal between 5 and 30% of their health bar in a single blow. That's fairly decent any way you slice it. At worst, your first hit will take off 5% of a boss's total health. If you get lucky, and that's 30%, that is incredible. Very RNG based, but this will help against rares and bosses alike. And the last section of this reveal was Witchbane. Enemies have maximum concentration equal to 40% of their max life. Break enemy concentration on hit equal to 100% of damage dealt. This means that an enemy with 100 HP has 40 concentration. If you hit that enemy for 10 damage, you'll chip away 10 points of concentration. Once you've chipped off the full 40, their concentration breaks, preventing them from casting as frequently as they did before. Again, we didn't get numbers on this, how long it prevents casting, or if this is a debuff to how quickly they can cast moving forward. So we'll have to really see how that works in game and get some testing on that one. And the last part of Witchbane is that enemies will regain concentration every second if they haven't been damaged in the last 5 seconds. This skill is pretty damn insane. If it works on bosses, which I'd assume it does, breaking their concentration could mean a noteworthy reduction in how often they cast dangerous spells. Remembering that a boss's health bar is much bigger, so they will have much more concentration to start with. Finally, moving to the leaked information, we saw 2 more passives for this Ascendancy. Pitiless Killer gives you Culling Strike, which instantly kills enemies below a certain HP threshold. In Path of Exile, this was 10%. And finally, we have No Mercy. Deal 30% more damage to enemies based on their missing concentration. Using the example before, if an enemy has 40 concentration and you've taken the full 40 off them through attacks, you'll then do 30% more damage based on this missing concentration, which in this example would be an extra 12 damage. These are actually kind of insane numbers. Imagine chunking a boss for 30% of its health with Judge, Jury, and Executioner, doing extra damage with No Mercy, limiting their spell casting with Witchbane, and then instantly killing them at 10% HP with Pitiless Killer. I will be 100% trying out this Ascendancy early on. Oh, sorry about this, and I had to edit this in. Another node for this one was revealed, Weapon Master, granting you 20 weapon set skill points. 20 more passive nodes. That's just nuts. I'm guessing this will be split 10 per weapon set, but unless I'm missing something here, 10 passive points is an insane value proposition. It almost seems like too much. Now, this is the Ascendancy we know the most about, so keep in mind you cannot take every single one of these things. This is where those harder choices are going to come in, and remember you have to choose some of those larger nodes before you can reach some of the later nodes. So for example, you can take Culling Strike, which is Pitiless Killer, and Decimating Strike, but that is going to be 2 of your Ascendancy trials right there. And our last Ascendancy option for the Mercenary in this video is the Gemling Legionnaire. This one ties a little into the lore, and honestly, I don't know enough about it, but skill gems are used by the Gemling group, fusing them directly into their skin to gain power. This Ascendancy, as a result, is heavily focused on your skills, starting with Integrated Efficiency, which just straight up gives you 3 additional skill slots. There's not really much to riff off here, you just get extra skills. If you can find more value in skills above those you already have, this is going to give you more power. This is a really great way to flesh out your build if you're missing a few skills that could really help you take advantage of some enemy weaknesses. This also feeds in directly to Thaumaturgical Infusion, which gives you cold, fire, or lightning resistance for every 3 gems of a certain color you have socketed. Remember, each skill gem has 5 support sockets. You have 9 skill gems in total, but you gain 3 more with the passive that came prior. So the Gemling Legionnaire can hold 12 skills. That's 72 gems total. For argument's sake, let's say every gem is green. You would then be given 24% additional lightning resistance. This isn't too bad. 24% is a decent chunk, and it's important to remember this is adding to your overall maximum. If you had capped your resistances, this lets you get above that, which can make you one tanky lad. Adaptive capability will help you get there too, aligning the attribute requirements of gems to your highest attribute, meaning blue gems can be used even if you only have 10 intelligence, giving you the flexibility to focus on stacking decks while using any gems you want. This is quite an underrated boon, especially if you've got the full 12 skills available from Integrated Efficiency. And finally, Crystalline Potential adds 12% quality to all skill gems. Quality is a stat that increases the overall effectiveness of gems and armor, generally buffing the damage or durations, but this is handled differently based on what the gem does. What's important though, is that it will straight up improve the quality of your skills across the board. Minor, but when it's impacting 72 gems, that absolutely builds up. And that brings us to the end. I love that Grinding Gear Games have decided to focus in on making Ascendancies feel very meaningful, but have also given us some more passive options within these. There is so much insane build variety in the game already, and this just elevates it that much more. I know my go-tos are the Infernalist, which will be my first Ascendancy I go for, and the Witch Hunter on the Mercenary is almost certainly my second. Let me know in the comments below which Ascendancy you're most looking forward to. Or, if you didn't see one you like, what are you hoping they'll bring to the game in the future? All of these classes will gain another Ascendancy option in the future, and we have another 6 classes waiting to be released, and their Ascendancies announced as well. This is going to double in size. It's just insane to think about. Thanks for checking out this video. Path of Exile 2 releases next week, and I'll be there streaming day 1 and releasing videos after. Let me know what you want to see on the game, and feel free to come hang out in my streams every Tuesday and Thursday, 4 PM Australian Western Standard Time. And I'll be streaming on release from 9 AM on the day. If you like the video, drop a like, sub if you want to see more, but you being here is what really matters. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.